Welcome to Resting Places, Learning Spaces, the podcast where we explore cemeteries, memorial spaces, and more, and the lessons they hold for history, memory, and education. I'm Dr. Hilary Van Dyke, and today we're taking a journey to a small but powerful site, Whispering Souls African American Cemetery. Located in Clearwater, Whispering Souls may not be on anyone's radar, but it is steeped in resilience, remembrance, and community history. This episode will explore the cemetery's origins, the people buried there, and how it could serve as a living classroom for teachers and students alike. One note about today's episode is that I am dealing with a cold, so if you don't like how my voice sounds today, I apologize in advance, and if you love how my voice sounds today, then you're welcome. I volunteer at the Pinellas County African American History Museum and actually have done research about this site in the past for an exhibit that we are working on for the museum. The cemetery has gone by different names throughout its history. Some of the names include Safety Harbor Black Historical Cemetery, the Safety Harbor Colored Community Cemetery, Safety Harbor Black Cemetery, and the Safety Harbor Cemetery. The land was designated as a resting place for the local Black community by Solomon Smith Coachman in the early 20th century. Alfred and Louisa Ayla purchased the land to create a subdivision in the neighborhood, but left Lot 15 open for the cemetery. In 1951, St. Paul Home Helping Hand Society bought the 3/4-acre parcel and sold it to the Safety Harbor Colored Community for $1 in 1953. There are many unmarked graves here. Part of why there are so many unmarked graves really are because of the practices used to mark the headstones. For example, marking the graves with tins, and when the paper blew away, the markers were lost. Questions of who should maintain the cemetery have also affected its ability to be well maintained throughout its existence. Also, the cemetery is technically located in Clearwater, which added to the confusion. In fact, Safety Harbor city officials have claimed that they didn't know that it even existed until the last few decades, which adds to the confusion. The cemetery is the final resting place of over 200 Black men, women, and children, including infants and veterans. Over the years, the cemetery has been ignored, abused, and disrespected. In 2017, the Safety Harbor African American Restoration Project started to get the cemetery proper care. It is led primarily by the granddaughter of one of Safety Harbor's first African American families, Jacqueline Hayes. Her grandparents are Charlie and Amanda Smith. In fact, Charlie Smith's name was one of the names on the deed. Jacqueline is also helped by Claudio, among others. To restore the cemetery, Claudio and Hayes formed a 501c3, organized cleanups, coordinated services with the cities of Safety Harbor and Clearwater, and claimed the deed. They also worked with the University of South Florida to survey the grounds, using ground-penetrating radar to help identify all the bodies. And finally, the cemetery is renamed the Whispering Souls African American Cemetery. In February 2025, the Whispering Souls African American Cemetery, Inc. and the Pinellas County Historic Preservation Board dedicated a Florida historical marker for the cemetery. To better understand the significance of Whispering Souls, I spoke to Jacqueline Hayes and historians Claudio and Laura Kepner. Thank you all so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today. Before I get into the 1.5 million questions that I have for you, could you please introduce yourself and any relevant information about you that you think the audience should know?
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Hayes, and I am the president of the board of Whispering Souls African American Cemetery. I am a first-generation Bostonian from Boston, Massachusetts. I have a host of relatives buried at Whispering Souls. Most notably is my grandfather, Charlie Smith, and my grandmother, Amanda Smith. And I've been involved in the project since we got started officially since 2017. I've been in Florida since 2015.
And is it correct that your grandfather is one of the names on the deeds of the cemetery?
Yes, my grandfather, Charlie Smith, he was a member of the St. Paul's Helping Hand Society, and he was their treasurer. So he signed the original deed that Claudio pulled up.
That's awesome.
That's where I realized my deep connection to the cemetery. I always knew that they were buried there, but I never knew he was a part of that organization?
My name is Claudio. I am from New York City originally. Lived and grew up across the street from a cemetery in Upper Manhattan. And so I have cemeteries on the brain, more or less. But the point being that I just grew up very comfortable with cemeteries and learning to respect cemeteries and also learn that there were stories that could be mined from cemeteries. My cemetery had among the interments the naturalist John James Audubon, which a lot of folks may have heard of, and also Clark Clement Moore, who wrote the Christmas story, "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." So that's just a handful of some of the stories I learned living across the street from the cemetery, and I got to learn that all cemeteries have stories. So when I found Whispering Souls after I eventually moved to Florida, began to try to find out what was the stories to be had here, and the rest is history.
Awesome. All right. And last but not least, Laura, what about you?
My connection to Whispering Souls is, first of all, I'm originally from California. When I moved to Safety Harbor, it just felt, in a positive way, it just felt foreign to me. Everything, the culture here is different, not in a bad way or a good way. It's just different, and it intrigued me. I wanted to learn the history, and I wanted to meet people, and boy, we just have so much history here. Much different with, we're in the South, and so there's a different history here than California has. So when I was writing a history book with Warren Fershine in 2013, local history book, and I wanted to make sure that we included the African American history. They were an integral part of building this town, and unfortunately, our early newspapers rarely mentioned anyone and rarely mentioned them by name unless they were, in some kind of trouble, which made it difficult to find a lot of the history that I know has just been overlooked or buried. So I started reaching out to the African American community to try to find stories, and I learned about this cemetery. It's not actually in Safety Harbor, but it used to be considered Safety Harbor back before it was annexed by Clearwater. Safety Harbor, the area known as Safety Harbor, was much larger than it is now. But I met a woman named Goldie Banks, who was Jacqueline's aunt, and she gave me such history. It was really amazing. She came here as a young girl with Jacqueline's mom back in the 20s. But anyway, I found this cemetery, and I don't remember exactly how I found it, but it was the weeds were to my knees. And I don't know, I was so moved by the cemetery. It just I felt like I had to do something to help. And I really was in no position to do anything. I didn't know anyone or know how to go about it, but I knew I needed to. And so I wrote that history book, and then later I wrote another one. And I met Jacqueline through her brother, Frederick. And I guess, as she said, the rest is history. But and I am on the board. I serve as secretary of the board of directors for Whispering Souls.
So, if I understand correctly, Whispering Souls has had several names. The ones I found were Safety Harbor Black Historical Cemetery, Safety Harbor Colored Community Cemetery, Safety Harbor Black Cemetery, and the Safety Harbor Cemetery. And so I'm very interested in how you all settled on the name Whispering Souls.
Okay, well, when my grandfather had the organization, St. Paul's Helping Hand Society, it was called the Safety Harbor Colored Cemetery. And then years later, there was another group that formed after his and before ours that named it, I think that name, that Safety Harbor Black Cemetery or African American Cemetery. They had a group for a couple of years that was trying to take care of the cemetery before we got a hold of it. And I think one of those names were their names. I'm not sure which one it was. The name Whispering Souls African American Cemetery came from once we formed a board, our first decision was to change the name. And we had a community discussion. We had a lot of community meetings on how we were going to move forward, even before we started the board. The first decision we made was to change the name. There was a lot of talk about why we shouldn't change the name, But I felt that there was no way that I wanted to lead a group called the Safety Harbor Colored Cemetery. And I said to the participants around the table, community members, black and white, some of them had people, the black people had people buried out at the cemetery, and a lot of the others were just community people that wanted to be involved. That we didn't choose that name. We didn't never chose to be called colored.
Right.
That was a description that was given to us. And so we don't recognize ourselves as being colored. And it's important, I felt, moving forward to define ourselves and name ourselves. I said we are African American, and that's the name that should go on to the cemetery. Whatever other name we put on it, we needed to be recognized for who we were. Now, the name Whispering Souls, we were looking at all these names. We asked everybody put names in a hat. But one of our board members, we would later found out was Native American. And when we were all just tasked with trying to figure out names, what would you like the name to be? And come to find out, she said she went out to the cemetery late one night, sat down on the grass, which at the time wasn't even mowed, looked up at the sky under a full moon, and a couple of names came into her spirit, Whispering Souls and Whispering Spirits. She said she felt like they were talking to her.
Wow.
And we were like, okay. And I found out later, we brought the names back to the board, and I later found out through investigating and talking more with her that she was Native American. Because I said, well, who's out there sitting on the grass under a full moon?
Before it's
doing a ceremony. Who are you talking to? And she was connecting. So when I, kind of got to the bottom of it, the board we looked at all our names and we voted, and everyone voted for Whispering Souls. Wow. And I thought it was great because it was paying homage to our Native American roots. The land was theirs before it belonged to any. And so I said, oh, this is just perfect. This is perfect. Let's do that. And that's the name that stuck.
So Whispering Souls African American Cemetery.
That's it.
Awesome. My next question for you is just wondering about, in the time that you've been doing your work, what have been your preservation efforts? And then also within that, I'm curious about any challenges that you've run into in that work.
We've done a lot. Oh my goodness, where do we start? One of our first things was, when Lou Claudio brought the cemetery group, he brought the cemetery to me when I met him. And he said, this is what we need to do. He kind of had a blueprint for how to go about saving this cemetery. You need to start a board, get some community members, start a board, clean it up, get land ownership. So once we found a name and we identified a board, the next thing to do was we cleaned it up. And I mean, just like Laura said, she was there, the weeds were knee high. It was taller than that when we got a hold of it. More like waist high. It was a mess out there. It was a mess, but we had so many people in the community that were so willing to, let's get this done. We cleaned that thing up. We cleaned it up. And once it was cleaned up, I mean, we had this vision on, we'd love to get a fence. We'd love to get a memorial of something out here. We'd love to get our name out there and a marker. So we started on all that. Actually, we've done a lot of the things. We've checked off all the boxes of Claudio's guide to how to save a cemetery. We got land ownership. We cleaned it up. We're restoring it. We lost a lot of trees during the hurricanes last year, and most of our trees were gone.
Wow.
But we were able to get some free trees from the city of Safety Harbor, and the city of Safety Harbor actually planted some mature trees for us. So now we're in the process of kind of redesigning landscaping our cemetery to how we want it to look. We have fencing now.
I want to throw something in there, Jacqueline. I think Jacqueline has this way of getting people excited and getting things done because of her passion.
Right.
And when she would call a meeting and ask, she would just go downtown and let people know. She didn't even have to know the person. This is what we're doing at the cemetery, and come on out and check it out. And we had so many people. We had, just, I mean, kids and adults and older people. and young people. I mean, it was just, yeah, I just had to throw that in, Jacqueline, because not everybody could get that many people out there to clean up a cemetery.
And the
But
interesting thing
you
about
have.
that kind of goes to another question is that those people that we're talking about were mostly non-African American. They came in droves, and they would say, "Well, I'm not black, but I don't have anybody buried out there. Can we help?" And at the time, I didn't really know a lot of people there. I was a new arrival.
Right.
I just knew a handful of people like Laura and Amy and others that were friends with my brother who had recently passed away. Those were my new friends. But then I had to make other connections to get this group started. So when we had our first community meeting, the Black community was very hesitant. And then they let me know right up front that they didn't believe in me or that this would ever happen.
Mm.
It was a big backlash because I was from out of town. Even though I had strong roots in Safety Harbor in the community, they weren't supporting me. And they let me know, we're
Right.
not going to support you. It's never going to happen. And I was like, well, that's fine because I don't even really know who you are anyway. I don't know you. So we just, all those that wanted to come one, come all. I used to put that on our flyer. And then they came. It was like, oh my goodness. They came. And a lot of people, all the recognition we've gotten throughout the years, that's always brought up. How did you get those people? And I said, well, you know what? When you put the word out there, you figure, it's not like we're offering food and drinks and, gift cards. It was obviously something that was touching their heart and their spirit that made them wanted to join up and help. And I mean, Florida. I mean, it's a big task to get out there in 80, 90-degree weather, cleaning up some
You made it.
cemetery.
Yeah.
But they came and they continued to come. I was always overwhelmed. Well, thank you for that, Laura. I mean, it's my energy, but it goes back to the people. Because I could talk to the cows come home, and if you don't have it in your spirit that this is something you want to do, you're not gonna want to help. But I said there's something in the water in Safety Harbor that just mobilized these folks. It was amazing.
Let me add a couple of things. When I first got involved with the site back in 1997 and began to do some of the research that was available, I did find the two last recorded deeds to the site back 1953, and it was deeded to the Safety Harbor colored community. And asking around, I was beginning to get legal opinions that was kind of flimsy and left a loophole that you could drive a Mack truck through. So one of my biggest concerns was trying to get a more firm, clear deed to the site to protect it. The question was going to be, well, how do we go about this? And it wouldn't be until over 20 years later that through various connections, we were able to get a lawyer, two lawyers actually. One was a Safety Harbor city commissioner who got involved, and he connected with one of his legal associates who was more into doing deeds and titles. And they worked for 2 years pro bono to produce a case that we were able to take to a judge. And the judge immediately, without hesitation, granted our nonprofit a clear and firm title to the site, which made me feel a whole lot better. That was one of my biggest goals, to protect the site. And one of the other things I always wanted to get was a GPR survey, which is a ground penetrating radar survey that archaeologists will use to see what's under the ground. Now, it's not an X-ray machine. What it does is it detects anomalies in the soil that would indicate possible grave sites. But there too is a question, well, how do I go about getting a GPR survey? Well, through a number of fortuitous things, we had a anthropology professor who lived in Safety Harbor who saw some of the media coverage that we're getting, and she wanted to know how she could help. And we told her, well, we could use a GPR survey. So she got together with some USF folks from the anthropology department, some students, and also the Florida Public Archaeology Network. And they came out and they did two ground penetrating radar surveys of the whole site, not the whole site actually, because one of the sites was covered with foliage. But we were able to establish that there are over 100 unmarked graves at the site because there are only 20 visible markers and only 14 of those have any kind of a name on them. But it's a half-acre site, and when you look at it, there's a lot of empty space, but I had the feeling that it's not empty space. And the ground penetrating radar survey confirmed that we were able to establish, and we got a graph, looks like a map of the site that shows a bunch of anomalies in rows that would indicate cemetery burials. So that was a big step in helping us identify what's going on here. And I think Jacqueline mentioned that we got the fence, and eventually we got a memorial marker, and we also got the historical marker that you'll see along roadsides marking historical sites that tells a story for perpetuity. And anyone who drives by and wants to see, well, what's this place all about? So those are some of the other preservation things that we got done.
It's truly, truly impressive work that you all have been doing. Are there any oral histories or personal stories connected to specific graves that stand out to you?
Well, I can share the first time I was out there when those weeds were so high, I had a very overwhelming pull toward the cemetery. I just felt, like I said, I felt overwhelmed. And I had a friend with me, and she said, there are snakes around here. So I had flip-flops on, and I was careful, but I saw this butterfly, and it was several inches. I've never seen one since. It was like an orangish red butterfly, and it came and it flew right in front of my face. And I don't know where it came from, but it flew across the cemetery, and I followed it, and it landed on top of a headstone of a marker. And that marker was Shedrick Witter. And it's one of the beautiful, you can tell they spent some money on it, very nice markers. We don't have, like Lou said, we don't have a lot of markers out there. But I looked into Shedrick, and I learned a lot about him because he had kind of a tragic story. He was a local businessman. He had a beer garden in the African American section of town. People were still segregated. And he and his wife, Maud, had 7 boys, 7 sons. He was a well-respected man in the community. And from what I can tell, take this with a grain of salt, he didn't have the same rights, but he was respected by the white community as well. And I mean, I'm sure that was frustrating because he probably could have been mayor, but our mayor and the constable stood up for him when he was taken to court. He ended up killing a young man who had come to his business and threatened his young son. I don't know which son, but he threatened him. And later I heard some stories that from community members who said, well, this young man kept going in and kept threatening his son, and he warned him. Well, he ended up shooting him. Shedrick was arrested and taken. He died in prison at the age of 38. He was a very intelligent man he had a patent for a telegraph pole. I wrote it down, a patent for electrical wire support tree, which had to do with telegraphs, which of course, we don't use anymore, but the community respected him, like I said. So it was really tragic. I wasn't able to find out any more about that, but my heart always went out to the memory of Maud because she was left with their 4 youngest who she had to raise by herself. And she did all right for herself. She opened up one of her kids had a barber shop in town, and she opened up a little bakery or store. And then real quick there was Ethel. Ethel Williams was fun to see. Her gravestone was right next to Shedrick's, and she died at only, I think she was 47. But she and her husband Eugene worked on a peacock farm, and the Eugene Pierce, a different person, owned this farm, and Ethel and her husband Eugene raised peacocks. And it was at the time the biggest tourist attraction in our area. And the Miami, I believe it was the Herald. Yeah, Miami Herald actually used their names, or used her husband's name, which was a real wonderful thing to find, because they were, all these years later, we knew who these people were, and we knew what Ethel did. And Pinellas County's Historical Society had a picture of Ethel feeding her peacocks. And so I was able to use that in one of the books. And so I just felt really just happy to find her marker there. Those are my stories.
The personal story that I would have to share is when I first came to the site. As I said, there were only 20 visible markers and only 14 of them had any kind of legible inscriptions. One of them was dating back to the 1896, which is the oldest marker that we have for the site. And it happened to be for a 4-month-old baby, Samuel. And that touched a bit of a nerve, having lost a child myself a long time ago. And it made me commit to trying to do right by this little 4-month-old child from over 100 years ago. My Brian is 1,000 miles away, so in some ways, I've sort of adopted Samuel, someone to look out for. It's I wish I could learn more about Samuel, his family, and some of the other families, and I think that's one of the next things I would like to get more involved in. Certainly, Laura and Jacqueline, whatever oral histories and family histories we can get from any of the internments there, that would be, I think, a next big project that I would like to see us tackle.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, me too. We had a Memorial Day ceremony, our first public one last year. A Vietnam vet that's buried out there. And his story is, I mean, he didn't die in Vietnam, but he died when he came back from Vietnam. He was so, like a lot of the soldiers, he was very just messed up in the head. And he started using drugs, and he died at a young age. He was like 20, 25 or 26. His daughter had never been to her father's grave, and we were able to connect her with her father's grave, Johnny Neal, last year. It was very moving, when she came out there and she was like, well, I don't know much about my father, but I had asked a lot of community people about him. And she came out, she brought pictures. It was just really, really very special for us to make that connection. And then we have Belle Sullivan, who's buried out there in this big old, has this big old crypt like grave out there. And she was a safety harbor, like a businesswoman. She has a lot of family, one of the largest Black families in Safety Harbor. They came from Georgia, and a lot of them had land in Georgia. When they came to Florida, they came with the mindset of, since a lot of them came from property, they came to Florida with that same knowledge of, we're going there and we're going to buy land. Right. We must have land. My grandfather was from Valdosta, Georgia also. So, he came down and he purchased land. Mm-hmm. And then Belle Sullivan came down and all of her family, they were all purchasing land. And then a lot of the land in the Black community was owned by her family. It's just so interesting. Like, you all own all that? Like, yeah. So Belle is buried out there. And so, it's just, it's just an amazing story. All those successful Black people that are buried out there, the stories that we know. And a lot of the graves that from the ground penetrating radar we've seen, they're all like lined up together. So that they're all families and not all like scattered all around. So yeah, it'd be awesome for us to do more research and learn more about who are these people that are in the unmarked graves. But as the community starts to open up, they start to share these stories. So, it's amazing.
For sure. These were really great stories. So I'm curious if you all have any opinions about what role a cemetery like Whispering Souls could play for schools in teaching history, teaching Black history. And then if you have any examples of schools who have done any work with you, you can share that during this as well.
We were working with Special Angels, Shannon Peck's organization out of Tampa, and we got a state grant for $250,000, and $50,000 of that helped us to pay for our memorial out there. We got a local cemetery organization to match that grant. The other $200,000 was supposed to be used for an educational endeavor. We were supposed to have the Hillsborough County schools doing tours out there and a curriculum based on our cemetery. And it was interesting when you sent your questions to us, it got me to thinking, well, what happened to that piece? Because we were never informed that the money is here or the money's there or we're getting ready to do this. So the project got kind of stalled. I don't know. I did some inquiries, and Lou also did some inquiries as to what happened. And I was told that, oh, if you want more information, you need to contact the school department in Hillsborough County. I mean, the students came out. We met some of the students with Shannon. We did a little history, and they did a little project with us. They made these wonderful little plaque-like markers that we still have that are on different graves and throughout the cemetery. But that little aspect of it, I mean, we all thought it was a wonderful idea, but I'm just not sure where it went. And it's been over 2 years since we've been awarded the money.
Right.
We've done work on our own. We've had we have a Boy Scout who wants to be an Eagle Scout who's putting together a project out there, and then to gain Eagle Scout status.
Mm-hmm.
He had come out there for one of our ceremonies and just really felt connected to Whispering Souls. So we've had young people out there. His junior ROTC troop from Pinellas Park High School came out and helped us build our lawyer's garden out there. And then when they did that, board members gave them a history and a walking tour of the cemetery, which was really cool. But we haven't done anything formalized with educational projects other than that.
Do you have any other ideas about ways that, and anyone can answer, that you can work with schools or could work with teachers? I guess I feel like, yeah, with schools or teachers, any other ideas about that?
Yeah, I think that's something that's always been on the back burner. At least we've been, trying to get the improvements and the markers. We have a new historical marker out there, and our beautiful marker with the names, memorial marker, and the trees. So now would be a good time to get in contact with any teachers that would be interested. I'm sure the board members and volunteers, we'd love to go out there and show them around and talk about its history. And I guess that's just something that we're going to have to bring up to the front burner.
Right.
It's definitely, field trips are always a difficult thing for schools just because of the way the buses work. But whenever there's a possibility, I'm always curious about thoughts about that.
Well, working with schools, I spent a lot of years working with educational television, going back to New York and continuing here in Florida. So I got a lot of experience working with students and teachers. And one of my thinkings is, and I appreciate your comment, that field trips are kind of difficult to arrange sometimes. So the old saying about if the mountain won't go to Muhammad, Muhammad will go to the mountain. And, perhaps it's something that we might be able to go visit some of the schools. I don't know if they still do PowerPoints these days. I'm retired 14 years from that sort of thing. But I know I would be happy to go visit a school with a PowerPoint slideshow showing our site and discuss our experience with the project. If it would fit into any teacher's curriculum. So a lot of that may depend on the teachers, thinking themselves what kind of curriculum and lesson they're trying to impart, and then figure out how we might be able to plug into that. And I think most of us on the board would be happy to contribute and be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
With this idea of potentially pulling like schools, teachers in, students in, or even just like you said, the Boy Scout and maybe other iterations of him, how do you hope the next generation will engage with Whispering Souls?
Well, it definitely starts with education. So, the small groups that we've had out there, the young people always say, wow, we didn't know this. And they're always so fascinated by it. So, like Laura said, I guess it does probably need to get on our front burner. I mean, we're so busy with restoration right now, but it's good to look forward for the future, how we would like the young people in the future to engage with the cemetery. There's so much history out there. There's so much African American history out there. I mean, just us on this podcast talking about those people that are out there. Like, wow, there's a lot of movers and shakers that we have in our midst that are buried out there. And they all have stories to tell. So, that's something we definitely need to look further into, to have more engagement with our younger generation and to pass on their history
Right.
through our cemetery. I like that idea that Lou had about, if they don't come to us, we should go to them. I mean, that's an awesome idea.
Yeah.
Awesome idea.
Well, and Laura mentioned, in her early stages with this, the history of the African American community in Safety Harbor is not voluminous. And I think the Whispering Souls Project has opened up a lot of doors and eyes to a history that had been neglected and maybe swept under a rug. And I'd like to see us maybe do more of that, maybe even just starting locally. We have a few schools here in Safety Harbor that might could benefit from a little bit more expanded history of the African American community right here in Safety Harbor, which I think has not gotten a lot of light. But certainly, any schools that we could plug into, I think again we would be happy to participate with that.
I've got a project that I mentioned to Jacqueline too that I've been really thinking about, and I'm a little bit camera shy, but I really think reaching young people through like TikTok. I'd like to go out there. I've been wanting to do this. I have a YouTube page that I haven't added to yet, but to go out and talk about the histories that we know of and just the history of the grounds, even the history of Sylvan Abbey, another cemetery nearby. It's fascinating, and once people are gone, they can't tell their story. So that's another idea that hasn't happened yet, but it's been brewing.
I like it. And YouTube has the shorts now too. So they have
Hmm.
a little function of it that's similar to like a TikTok or Instagram reel as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I like it. All right.
Hillary, if I may, one of my concerns as we're talking about education is the changes that education seems to be facing these days with all of this controversy by DEI and
Hmm.
what can be taught and what cannot be taught. And that strikes me as something of a political, cultural minefield that I certainly haven't learned how to navigate just yet. And then again, I'm not an active educator anymore, but I know that the whole story about what we have come to call the lost and erased cemeteries is not a happy story.
Right.
It usually involves, difficult tales about Jim Crow era. Usually involves stories about how callous developers and businesses just paved over some of
Right.
these African American cemeteries. It involves letting them know that there are African American cemeteries underneath Tropicana Field. These are unpleasant stories for some people. And again, I'm not sure that again it isn't navigating through a minefield. So that's a whole
Yeah.
other level of consideration, I think, as we talk about the educational aspect of this topic.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, obviously my research interest is place-based education through historically Black cemeteries. So that is definitely so many aspects of it naturally fall into what you're talking about. I actually just finished my first draft for a book I'm working on, and parts of it extended this, I kind of just detailed all of the things that have been happening in this conversation since 2020, basically. Every other month there's something new, but I think the one thing that ultimately teachers have to just kind of have and decide to have is just bravery. And I say that because in the state of Florida, we have standards to teach Black history, case like just period. And if you are a teacher, especially I would say middle school and high school teacher, you have social studies standards that you need to teach. And as long as the work you're doing is grounded in those standards, then I think that they are safe. Generally speaking, a lot of the conversation around House Bill 7 is thinking about the fears around indoctrination of students, right? And so if you're presenting students with teaching to standards, presenting them with primary sources, letting the students be the ones that are having their own discoveries and takeaways and not forcing any sort of opinions on them, then there's really not anything that is breaking any laws. I think what happens is people are overcautious, overcorrecting, and so then you have schools and districts where they are doing way more than any laws asking. The big focus is, if you're thinking about the stop woke thing, is those 8 provisions for essentially how not to indoctrinate, not that you can't teach Black history. And I would also add, in the same bill, they extended the amount of Black history that is required instruction as well. So it's I think there's like the parts of it that are loud and out in the media versus the actual language of the law. And so much of what I think needs to happen is just regular teachers should read the law as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That might be my rose-colored glasses, of course. And, I'm not a K-12 teacher at this time anymore, so I can say it from, this side of things, like teach Black history anyways. But I don't think it's to teach Black history anyways. I think it's your required instruction by the state includes Black history. And these spaces provide interesting ways to cover those standards that are not as boring as just sitting in your classroom reading a textbook.
Good to know.
The irony, too, is the flip side of that is that teaching students about the lost and erased African American cemeteries and their recovery, which is what we're doing, in Whispering Souls, is how they offer an opportunity for multiracial collaboration and cooperation to make a project work. And we've seen that in Whispering Souls, and I see it in a lot of other cemetery projects. Almost on a daily basis, I Google News, the topic cemeteries, and I see cemetery stories from all over the country. And a lot of them are horror stories, but a lot of them are stories with happy endings of people coming together to fix what was wrong in the past. And there are very many inspirational stories of collaboration and cooperation among people of all ages, colors, creeds, and I think there's one aspect of the story that could be and should be especially reinforced.
Right. And I think too, when you think about tying it to social studies standards, learning about civic engagement is part of the curriculum too. So even this idea that you could and should care about and volunteer and help with things, even if they don't directly benefit you in some way. So that is just an example of like a community coming together to do what's right. So yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of learning opportunities in cemetery work and in Whispering Souls specifically. But I generally just operate from the fact that there are standards that there's required instruction, and as long as you stay within the state standards with what you're doing and let the students think for themselves and not tell them what to think, then you can't be upsetting anybody. And if you are, you can back up the decisions you've made through the state standards and through the lesson planning that you did, and can showcase what you did.
Mm-hmm.
Students have big brains. They're going to have opinions, and like they don't need adults to tell them how to feel, because I promise you they will tell you how they feel. So what are your dreams for the future of Whispering Souls? So let's say 5 to 10 years from now, what do you see?
That everyone will know what it is. It won't be those stories like, well, what is that space? They'll read the marker, they'll understand the history. We'll have everything in place. We'll have irrigation for our trees and all our plants out there, and that it will be a welcoming space to people to come and sit and reflect. There's some of that going on now, but, more so it'll be in an inviting space, and that the history will be out there and that people will know the history of these people that are buried there. That's what I see. That's, and it's interesting, ever since we got started, we've come such a long way in such a short period of time with this, this once forgotten cemetery. I hear these stories about people saying how they used to drive by there, or they used to park there and do paperwork, or, walk by there and never knew what it was. The judge that granted us land ownership, his family grew up in that neighborhood for 4 generations. He had no idea it was a cemetery, living right around the corner, because there was nothing to say this is a cemetery.
Right.
So my hope is that will never be again. Well, it's definitely never going to be again because of all that signage we have out there, but that it's going to be this warm and welcoming place that people are going to come, sit, reflect, learn the history of those that are buried there and why they had to be buried there.
Right.
Why? You got to tell the story so that people will understand and recognize this is where we don't want to be. And a lot of that is sharing the histories in the stories, and the cemeteries open up a lot dialogue. That's
Yeah.
what I found out. I never liked cemeteries. I never liked cemetery. I never wanted to be around them. And, before I got involved with Whispering Souls, and then I got comfortable with being in a cemetery and then understanding the stories and the past and what I could learn from these cemeteries. What I could learn, and I learned so much. And I visited other historic cemeteries, white ones, because I was told, you need to visit the McMullen Cemetery. The McMullens is the pioneer family that
Right.
gave us our land. And so they have their own cemetery. And I was told from the McMullen family, please visit our cemetery. And I went and I learned a lot. I learned a lot. A lot, a lot, a lot. So I'm like, okay. But I just see it as a warm, welcoming place in the future with the birds flying all around and the butterflies. We got the garden club wants to do a butterfly path, and everybody wants to have their hand in our cemetery, which is so cool to me. I think this is amazing. Everybody wants to have their hand in the rebuilding and the restoration of this place for the future. And I see it happening. I see all those trees blooming and all that hard work we're putting into keeping them alive. And it's going to be this awesome, super awesome place.
Whatever happens in the next 10 years, one thing that I think about a lot is keeping it funded, being able in the future to have whatever board is in place, have a way to pay landscapers. And so that's something
Right.
I think about. We need ways to make sure we build our funds. That's a little more boring part than
No, but that's
Jack.
the reality. That's the reality.
Yeah.
Well, actually, truth to tell, most of my goals have been achieved. And that would include getting a firm and clear title and deed to the site, getting a fence around the site, getting a memorial marker to honor the folks that are buried there, and the historical marker that tells the story. Beyond that, I think I share Laura's concern about that we will always have funding to keep the place mowed. We got to pay the guy who mows the grass, and beyond that, I don't really have a whole lot more I would like to see done to the place. Meditation garden sounds nice, and butterfly garden that sounds nice, but it's such a humble little 3/4 acre site that has survived in the middle of a residential subdivision, and we've made a lot of changes to it, good changes, needed changes. But I'm at the point where I'd like to just leave well enough alone and keep the
Mhm.
grass mowed.
Yeah.
My last question is, if someone's listening to this in the community and wants to come out and support in some way, how do they do that?
Well, we have a website. We have a Facebook page.
Venmo.
Okay.
Oh, you go, Laura. That's hello.
What's the website? Is it Whispering Souls?
www.wsaac.org.
And then on the Facebook, is it Whispering Souls African American Cemetery Restoration Project?
Yes, on
Yes.
Facebook.
Yes.
And then, Laura, what is that Venmo?
It is at Whispering Souls AAC.
Do we accept Bitcoin?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
No pleasure.
Well, I'm back again with my bestie Michelle, my co-host in secret. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
All right. So, of course, always thinking about implications for teachers in classrooms when I'm doing this work. And with Whispering Souls, I think it definitely could be a powerful teaching tool in K-12, probably even in college classrooms. I'm really thinking about the idea that teachers could use the site to explore history, local history, to explore segregation, to explore African American funeral customs. I also think students could engage with the cemetery through primary sources like obituaries, oral histories, local archives, cemetery records. Even in the interview with Jacqueline and Lou, the way that Jacqueline realized that her own grandfather was one of the deed holders through a primary source of the deed. So even just things like that. And then even the imagery from some of the headstones could be used to think about beliefs, values, and information about the buried. And then, of course, always with like a hyper-local situation like that, it's a way to teach civic engagement, which kind of came up in the conversation as well. What about you? What are you thinking?
All of those things, and to connect them to benchmarks and what we have or what we can be doing in the classroom. There's a couple different things, but I want to start first with the understanding that if we're taking kids into cemetery spaces, we are talking about trying to help them build empathy. That is a skill that we learn, that we practice. But because we are going into cemeteries, we do want to also take into consideration that students might make the realization that life is short and we will all eventually die. Mm-hmm. And so that is something for teachers to keep in mind when they're embarking on a project like this. We want them to embark on projects like this, but we always want them to do that with open eyes and thinking about how students might be taking meaning from all of it.
Right.
In terms of how we connect this in the classrooms, there are a bunch of different ways. And listening to the interview that you had, it just got my thinking going in lots of different directions. But the very first part of it, which you've already brought up, is the civics in action. Mm-hmm. And so we do actually have a benchmark for that, civics in action. And with that benchmark, we're specifically looking at what are the ways that individuals can interact with their local government. What agencies do they go to? What is the problem that they're trying to address? And also, how do we hold government accountable? And how can we as individuals influence the government? And so just in those ways, thinking about how this is a history of segregation and that was a state-sponsored, way of life for many years, we do need to hold our government accountable for that. And these individuals have done that. So they have done the civics in action. So this is an excellent case study to identify how individuals do hold their government accountable and how they take appropriate steps to address problems.
Right. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm also thinking of our African American history benchmarks. Specifically, the first one that comes up that is really appropriate is at the 4th grade level, which is identifying African American community leaders within Florida. Our Florida social studies benchmarks focus on Florida in 4th grade and Florida history. And so that would be the first place where this would naturally be tucked in or could be tucked into curriculum. But then in the middle school level, because our American history benchmarks in the middle school level are U.S. history through Reconstruction, it's not as easy as a fit there. But that's where we do have the civics course where this could be brought in. So in elementary level, this could definitely be something that comes in 4th grade.
Yeah.
In the middle school level, this could be something that comes in through the civics course.
Cool.
And then in high school, because high school goes all the way to the present, that is where, and of course with high school students and being more, able to take on projects and have accountability outside the classroom as well, that might be the grade level where you have the greatest interaction with the local cemeteries. And we do have the social studies benchmarks that would back that up as well. And then in terms of how we can approach these topics in the classroom, this is absolutely social history at its finest, because it is the connection between then and now, what daily life was like in our different communities, and the difficulty that we have in understanding the perspectives of communities that are underrepresented in our sources, as came out in your interviews as well. And it made me think, I don't know if you remember, we did a field trip ourselves to the Largo Public Library, and we were looking at newspapers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like
that
a
was
whole
so much fun
ago, but it was so much fun. But it was eye-opening in going through newspapers from the 1950s, the 1960s, and knowing that there's an African-American community here in Largo, but not seeing that in the newspaper, except for these small references. So for example, I remember vividly, it was the yearly report of the number of students enrolled in the different schools. And so you saw, there was a Black school here and they had children here, but you look at the rest of the newspaper and you would have no idea that there was a community here.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah.
I mean, not weird. I guess that is what it was.
That is what it was. But it is why things like the cemeteries could get lost, because if you don't have someone being the advocate, it's just, it's going to suffer. Yeah. And so, when we're learning history and when we're teaching students how we learn history, the historiography, the actual practice of how we learn our history, and we're talking about sources and than where you have lack of sources. So I think that those are really interesting and amazing conversations to have. And that would mostly be at the high school level.
Right.
But then what I also heard in the interview coming out towards the end of that was the conversation about oral history and how that can help build a deeper and stronger connection for students to their community. Because what's really true in Pinellas County, as with most of coastal Florida and places like Orlando, is that many of the residents were not born and raised here. And that's another reason why these cemeteries might have gotten forgotten and lost, because the people moving in don't know. Right. And so if we can bring in those oral histories, it could help us do a better job of building community back again, where we have a population that people came from all over. It can start to help them build that sense of community.
Right. Okay. I think the one thing, of course, that you brought up kind of early on when you're thinking about going to the cemetery are just like the reservations. And I would just add a few. I think what you said, thinking about sensitivity around death, but then also just remembering parental concerns that might come up. People find cemeteries creepy.
Some people do.
And so really making sure the work you're doing is definitely tied to benchmarks. And then, of course, limited transportation options. But I think especially schools near it definitely have a greater chance of making that happen.
And again, doing so would help build that sense of community.
Right. Alternatives could be just alternatives to avoiding some of these issues could just be making sure that there's clear communication, framing it as a history lesson that's steeped in benchmarks, and then, of course, an alternative lesson for like a student whose parents are like, no, definitely no. Any other thoughts about that?
So listening to the interview when Lou brought up the possibility of coming out to schools and being a speaker within the classrooms, that absolutely is an option where the teachers would not have to undergo all of the steps that are required to put together a field trip, to try to find funding for transportation. To have somebody come out to the classroom and be able to present within that space is absolutely the next best thing. And I think you would find many teachers would be open to that possibility.
Yay. Okay, so it's like a dream collaboration might be happening soon.
Absolutely.
Cool.
I would love to see this happen and become a reality in our classrooms.
For sure. I know some people I can connect you to now. So
Excellent.
That wraps up this episode of Resting Places, Learning Spaces. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to share it with your fellow educators, travelers, or anyone interested in the intersection of history and place. You can also follow me on Instagram at Professor Van Dyke to continue the conversation or recommend a topic. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember, every resting place has a story to tell.